Oda Nobunaga was a powerful daimyo in the late 16th century of Japan. Daimyo meaning a feudal lord, who at the time would have owned significant portions of land. Nobunaga is regarded as one of the three unifiers of Japan, something that seemed like an impossibility given the turbulent political times and constant warring, along with his retainers Toyotomi Hideyoshi and Tokugawa Ieyasu. Now before we begin, I'll start by saying that Oda Nobunaga was a part of a lot of bloody and epic battles, so this video might be a bit longer than usual in order to cover the most significant skirmishes. But let's begin with his early life. Nobunaga was born in June 1534 and was the second son to a respected military governor known as Oda Nobuhide, where they lived in the province of Owari. Nobuhide would spend most of his fatherhood trying to whip Nobunaga into a worthy successor, but Nobunaga was said to be a rebellious child, if not one who was downright weird. He even earned himself the nickname Owari no Asuke, meaning the big fool of Owari, much to his father's displeasure. Nobunaga was known to be a free spirit and would spend much of his time gallivanting with other youths without any regard to his own rank in society. But in 1551, when Nobunaga was 17 years old, his father would suddenly die. Nobunaga was said to handle the death pretty badly, throwing ceremonial incense at the altar and screaming with grief. An important mentor and retainer to Nobunaga, named Hirate Masahide, might have consoled the young successor, but instead, he committed seppuku right in front of him so as to startle him into his obligations. I think slapping him in the face and giving him a good talking to might have gotten the point through, but if I've learned anything about samurai from the feudal era of Japan, it seems like they were pretty excessive in everything they did. Either way, Masahide slashing his stomach open got the job done, because Oda Nobunaga was soon set on the right path. Nobunaga was the legitimate heir to his father's clan, but there were many who disputed this, including his own brother, Oda Nobuyuki. Nobuyuki would even rise 1,000 men against Nobunaga in an attempt to oust him from his role, likely on the account that he was always a weird child and hadn't demonstrated any worth for such a position of power. But this would be what I like to think is the birth of the Oda Nobunaga that would rise to become the unifier of Japan, for he showed no remorse in suppressing the members of his own family who were against his rule. Oda Nobunaga's uncle, named Oda Nobutomo, would take over Kaiyosu Castle and would rally support against Oda Nobunaga, but in 1556, Nobunaga cut him down before he could really get the ball rolling. If you think assassinating his own uncle is bad, Nobunaga would go on to move against his own brother, Oda Nobuyuki, who he had killed just 3 years after his uncle. In doing so, Nobunaga had control over the Owari province, a pretty decent bit of land to have as an aspiring warlord. By this point, Oda Nobunaga was only 22 and was already in control of a major province. All it took was killing a bunch of his own family members. No big deal, right? A year later in 1560, pretty much everyone knew who Oda Nobunaga was, and what he was capable of, though his numbers still dwarfed when in comparison to men like Imagawa Yoshimoto, who had amassed an army of 25,000 men. Yoshimoto was a feudal lord in Japan, and one who was known at the time for winning many battles. Essentially, this was a guy you didn't really want to mess with at the time. In fact, some historians actually report that Yoshimoto had an actual number of 40,000 men at his disposal, but this is also considered to be a lie that Yoshimoto told to put even more fear into his enemies. Yoshimoto would march alongside the Matsudaira clan, the same clan who would become the Tokugawa clan, and eventually Nobunaga's closest allies. Yoshimoto would lead them toward the land of Kyoto, with the goal in mind to protect the fragile Ashikaga shogunate, who were vulnerable at the time due to several early deaths and complicated issues with succession. Ever ambitious, Oda Nobunaga sought to pounce on the Ashikaga and take Kyoto as part of his ruthless conquest. The only problem was, he only had about 3,000 men. He was advised to not even entertain the idea of taking on Yoshimoto because he'd no doubt be crushed. But Nobunaga, in his newfound wisdom, or sheer arrogance, calmly told his advisors that only a strong and offensive attack would make up for the lack of numbers. And so he ordered his men to attack in what would become known as the legendary Battle of Okihazama. But he wasn't about to just send his men to the slaughter, no. Oda Nobunaga was made aware that Yoshimoto Imagawa's army was celebrating in the narrow gorge at Dengaku Hazama. A good number of them were drunk or otherwise too relaxed to take up arms, for who in their right mind would lay an attack on 25,000 men, or 40,000 men if the accounts of his grand army were true. It's here we see method to Nobunaga's madness, and begin to understand that the weird troubled boy who'd lost his father too early had gained something else in the form of a keen eye for strategy and deception. You see, he and his men set up an array of flags and dummy troops made of straw and spare helmets, helping to give the impression of a large host on the horizon. However, his actual army hurried down to the gorge, making their way behind Yoshimoto's men. It's also said that there was a massive thunderstorm at the point of attack, and while Yoshimoto Imagawa's men were fleeing for shelter, Oda Nobunaga's 3,000 men made for the attack. With the lightning, rain, thunder, drunkenness, and sheer shock, Yoshimoto's men were being caned. In fact, Yoshimoto didn't even realize what was going on. It's said that he thought a brawl had broken loose amongst his men and left it for them to deal with as he sheltered from the rain. But when 2 samurai came rushing up to him with spears, he quickly caught on. He was able to deflect one of the spears with his sword, but the second attacker took his head off. Now without a leader, the Imagawa clan shrunk under the ferocity of Nobunaga's men. To make matters worse, the Matsudaira clan who had agreed to march with them stood down and pledged their allegiance to Nobunaga. This is where Tokugawa Ieyasu and Oda Nobunaga would meet and go on to become great allies. It's also here that Nobunaga would notice Toyotomo Hideyoshi, a man who at first would be repairing his sandals, but would soon become his loyalist retainer and the second unifier of Japan. If we can take anything away from the Battle of Okihazama, forgive me as I get a bit philosophical here, is that despite the odds, and regardless of how bleak a prospect looks, you can never know the outcome until you try, much like Nobunaga did. Unless of course you're trying to make a career on YouTube, in which case I know exactly how Yoshimoto Imagawa must have felt right before he was decapitated. 1561 was a pretty active year for Nobunaga, who after the Battle of Okihazama would go on to lay siege at Inabayama Castle in the province of Mino after clan leader Saito Yochitatsu died suddenly of an illness. He would be succeeded by his 19-year-old son, Saito Tatsuoki. But Tatsuoki, in a small number of words, wasn't that good of a leader or a military strategist. In fact, he was so bad that Nobunaga didn't even really have to do much to gain control of the region. He was able to convince Tatsuoki's retainers into joining him, which weakened the clan significantly. There was a lot of political back and forth, where the Saito clan would hold out for 6 years before Nobunaga had enough of beating around the bush and captured the castle in 1567. Nobunaga would rename the castle Gifu, as well as the surrounding area. Because of its central location, it made it a desirable position in which to govern or control the rest of the country. There was even a phrase that was coined in the Sengoku era, stating that he who controls Gifu controls Japan. It's during this time that Nobunaga's ambitions to unify Japan became obvious to others, for with Gifu under his control, the future looked promising. He even started using a new personal seal for when signing documents that read Tenkafubu, which means rule the empire by force. A year later in 1568, Ashikaga Yoshiaki, the 15th shogun of the Ashikaga shogunate, went to Nobunaga to ask for his aid in taking back the shogun. It's said that he had lost it to killers who had slain the shogun before him and had installed a puppet shogun known as Ashikaga Yoshihide. This gave Nobunaga a reason to finally enter the Kyoto region, and so he agreed to help Ashikaga Yoshiaki in reclaiming the shogun. However, there was a clan known as the Rokkaku clan, who opposed Yoshiaki. They refused to acknowledge him as shogun, and were ready to go to war against him should he even enter Kyoto under the assumption that he was in charge. Nobunaga would have probably rolled his eyes at this, and would have preferred to have skipped the skirmish and go about taking Kyoto under his own terms. But he'd made a promise to Yoshiaki in establishing him as shogun, and so he drove the Rokkaku out by attacking their castles. In the same year, Nobunaga did enter Kyoto and fulfilled his promise of making Ashikaga Yoshiaki the shogun. But he refused any and all direction from Yoshiaki in the future, going on about as if Kyoto was his land and treating the now shogun as if he were a mere guest. It would make their relationship most tedious. In fact, they would fall out in 1573, whereby Nobunaga would dispose of him, ending the Ashikaga shogunate for good. Yoshiaki was said to be so at loss after being shut down by Nobunaga that he shaved his head and went on to live a modest life as a monk, about as far away from Nobunaga as he could get. Nobunaga would continue his battles with other daimyos who were wrestling with the same ambition of unifying Japan. Nobunaga would team up with Tokugawa Ieyasu to defeat the Asakura clan and the Azai clan, who were particularly annoyed and repulsed by Nobunaga's increasing power. During this battle, there was a monastery near the base of Nobunaga known as the Enryaku-ji, who trained deadly warrior monks known as Sohei. Unfortunately for Nobunaga, these guys were on the Asakura and Azai side of the fence in terms of allegiance, and were a significant threat to Nobunaga given their proximity and rumoured skill in battle. So Nobunaga eliminated them before they could even think about turning their swords on him, going on to raze their entire monastery and killing monks, laymen, women, children, and just about anyone who was there. It's said that this was Nobunaga at his most brutal, for the entire mountainside where the monastery was based ran with blood. It also shows the levels to which Nobunaga was willing to go to achieve his goal, that he would even go as far as to slaughter children in the quest for dominion. But the bloodshed wouldn't stop there. Oda Nobunaga grew wary of another sect of warrior monks, known as the Iko-Iki, who were said to be growing in power. They would seize daimyo holdings by force, and would eventually take over Nagashima Castle. Unfortunately for them, this was situated close to the border of the Owari province, the same territory in which Nobunaga was born and raised in, and one he very much had control over. The Iko-Iki rejected Oda Nobunaga's samurai rule, and would not submit to his notion of ruling Japan. So Oda Nobuoki, a younger sibling of Oda Nobunaga, attacked the Iko-Iki in an attempt to impress his brother, only to be killed. Outraged by this, Oda Nobunaga committed to an 11-year siege on the fortress in which they all lived. When they eventually surrendered, it would seem like Nobunaga would absorb the warrior monks into his army, but instead, he set the entire fortress ablaze, causing the death of over 20,000 men, women, and children. Even those who tried to escape were killed upon exit. In 1573, one of the most formidable players in the anti-Nobunaga alliance was Takeda Shingen. But Shingen didn't go for Nobunaga, but instead went after his closest ally, Tokugawa Ieyasu, who would suffer a defeat at the Battle of Mikatakahara. But after the battle, Tokugawa Ieyasu launched night raids, if only to get under Shingen's skin. But the effort had a much more significant effect, for it led Shingen to believe that Tokugawa was preparing for a counterattack, thus holding Shingen from advancing further and crushing what little Tokugawa had left. There was a stalemate here for a few months, but as luck would have it, well, luck for Tokugawa anyway, Shingen would die of throat cancer. Nobunaga was pretty relieved to hear this too, for now he could focus on dissolving Yoshiaki in the Kyoto region, as I mentioned earlier, whereby he would end the Ashikaga shogunate for good. In the same year, he also finally crushed the combined forces of Asakura and Asai, driving both clan leaders to commit suicide in the face of their defeat. The combined forces of Tokugawa and Nobunaga would devastate Takeda Shingen's clan shortly after his death. In the decisive battle of Nagashino, Nobunaga would arm his men with guns, the first usage of guns in Japan. Though they were just matchlock rifles, Takeda Shingen's clan had never seen anything like this. To make matters even worse, Nobunaga sorted his men into 3 lines to have them firing in rotation, thus cutting down the slow reloading time of the matchlock rifles. Needless to say, the Shingen clan was quickly destroyed. By 1582, Nobunaga had most of Japan under his rule, or at least enough of it that the entirety of Japan knew who he was, and that he was a man to be feared. It was here in 1582 that Nobunaga's administration was at the height of its power, and was about to launch invasions into the Ichigo province and Shikoki. In 1582, Nobunaga would attend a temple known as Honnoji in Kyoto, where he would hold a tea ceremony. During this time, he also ordered his retainer, a man named Akechi Mitsuhide, to march west and assist Toyotomi Hideyoshi, who was fighting the Mori clan, another clan who rejected Oda Nobunaga as unifier of Japan. But Mitsuhide ignored these orders, and with 30,000 soldiers at his side, he moved against the unsuspecting Nobunaga at Honnoji. His army surrounded the temple and eventually set it on fire, Sound familiar? And during the skirmish that took place after, Oda Nobunaga was killed. Some have said that Oda Nobunaga committed seppuku, slashing open his own stomach to deny his retainer the kill, as was customary during battle, by the loser. But Mitsuhide personally claimed responsibility for Nobunaga's death, claiming it was he who had delivered the final blow. Oda Nobunaga's son, Nobutada, was also present at Honnoji, and while he tried to escape, he was also cornered and killed. But why did Akechi Mitsuhide betray Oda Nobunaga? Well, there's quite a few good reasons actually. You see, a few years prior, under the orders of Oda Nobunaga, Mitsuhide captured Hatano Hideharu, a leader of the Hatano clan, who were based alongside the passage to Kyoto. In order to avoid bloodshed, Mitsuhide offered up his own mother as hostage to the Hatano clan, going on to say that if Hideharu surrendered and came peacefully, he would not be killed. Seeking to avoid bloodshed as well, Hideharu complied. However, after arriving with Mitsuhide in the presence of Nobunaga, Nobunaga had him executed, despite the pleas of Mitsuhide to spare him for the sake of his own mother. As soon as the Hatano clan found out that their leader had been killed, they killed Mitsuhide's mother. It's unknown if this is the sole reason which cultivated Mitsuhide's betrayal, but if it wasn't, what follows next was bound to see it happen. Nobunaga showed no signs of remorse for his actions. In fact, he even went on to publicly shame and insult Mitsuhide, as if he was his very own verbal punching bag. Another theory as to Mitsuhide's betrayal comes from a supposed disagreement with land. Apparently, Nobunaga would take a piece of land, which Mitsuhide owned, and would offer it up to his page, named Mori Ranmaru, a man who Nobunaga was alleged to have had a ritualized homosexual relationship with. Outraged that his land was being taken away from him, Mitsuhide launched his attack on Nobunaga, sealing his fate. Either way, I guess some might say that after his terrifying accounts of slaughter, burning, oath-breaking, and sheer ruthlessness, Nobunaga kinda had it coming. One last point to make about Nobunaga before I get out of here is that Nobunaga was a pretty open-minded guy for someone so hellbent on nothing but Japan. He loved the European culture, which at the time was a new thing for Japan, whereby he collected pieces of art, armor, and weapons. He's also considered to be the first Japanese man in history to wear European clothes. Furthermore, he even supported the establishment of the first Christian church in Kyoto in 1576, showing that he was tolerant of other religions being practiced in his country. But that doesn't change the fact that Nobunaga was a bit of a bloodthirsty animal, if not one who was truly ambitious and would sacrifice anything in his race to unify Japan. But tell me what you thought about Oda Nobunaga in the comments below, and don't forget to like this video and hit the subscribe button. More samurai are coming in the next video, where we continue on with the turmoil in the wake of Oda Nobunaga's death, in the form of the man who would succeed him, Toyotomo Hideyoshi. Until the next time, guys.